If religion's stock and trade is inexplicable, the coming years don't look like boom times. In other words, if we assume that the basis for religion, we go back in history and we research the origin of religion according to the history of mankind, we will see that for the most part, religion came to exist, at least for many people, because people could not explain life. They couldn't explain life, and they couldn't explain the occurrences in life. Lightning, thunder, storms, good tidings, bad tidings, it was all guesswork for them. And it bothered people. And they wanted to have some kind of control over the situation. So they created gods. They created Zeus and Apollo and all kinds of gods, etc., that they could, because once you have a god that you've created, you can now worship him, and you can bring him sacrifices. And it was a way of kind of controlling the thermostat in ancient times. The inexplicable. And of course, in there came superstition and all these various different things to explain life. And to gain control over life. Of course, it was fictitious, and it rarely worked at all. And when it did, it wasn't because people actually, had any control of the situation through what they were doing, because they weren't worshiping the proper God, the God of the Jewish people, the God of Torah. But that was the way they dealt with reality. So therefore, if that's the case, as science becomes more sophisticated, and the world of physics and astronomy and biology and chemistry and all these various different disciplines are able to crack the code of life physically on a physical level, never on a spiritual level, but at least on a physical level, they make life more explicable, more understandable, more relatable. So therefore the article is saying at the basis of religion, which is not the case of Torah and Judaism, of course, but for others it was in ancient religions and the pantheon and all these different types of avodah and idol worshipping, right? If the basis for religion was inexplicable, today those things are now explainable. So therefore religion no longer is important to many people. This is half of the giant paradox, the article says, and it's one reason why the average scientist today is probably less religious than the average scientist of 50 or 100 years ago, because things have become clear. We can explain so much of the physical world and daily occurrences based upon scientific discovery and technological understanding. So religion, from that perspective, is out, right? However, that was as of 1992, right? Today, as of 2010, right, things have changed dramatically. Many in the scientific world probably changed their mind. For example, we have the following quote. This is from an article called Science and God, a Warming Trend, right? So it says the following thing. The fact that the universe exhibits many features that foster organic life, such as precisely those physical constants that result in planets and long-lived stars, also has led some scientists to speculate that some divine influence may be present. Meaning what? Meaning that there are things in the universe today, after trying to disprove God and going to a great extent to try to find information that might contradict the reality of God, they have in fact come up with results that show how impossible life really is to create. The odds are against it if it wasn't for the fact that some type of the divine influence existed, right? So Stephen Hawking writes in his book, A Brief History of Time, the following thing. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers, that is the constants of physics, seem to have been finally adjusted to make possible the development of life. For example, he says, if the electric charge of the electron had been only slightly different, I mean, it's when you think about how much is dependent upon this reality to make life possible, and it's so negligible to some degree. It's so fine, meaning that it's a small difference with a huge impact. No life, no creation. Stars would have been unable to burn hydrogen and helium, or else they would not have exploded. It seems clear that there are relatively few ranges of values for the numbers for the constants that would allow for development of any form of intelligent life. And that's a major statement from a person who at this time did not believe in the reality of God per se. Most sets of values would give rise to universes that, although they might be very beautiful, it might result in some kind of creation, right? They would contain no no one able to wonder at their beauty. In other words, there would be no human life to appreciate that creation. Then what's the point? So Hawking says that he can appreciate taking this as possible evidence of divine purpose in creation and the choice of the laws of science by God. Okay? He's not a believer per se, but he's pointing out that, if a person wants to believe, this would be evidence. This would be a reason, a hook to hang your hat. So, the Nobel laureate and high-energy physicist Professor Stephen Weinberg in Scientific American wrote the following thing: how surprising it is that the laws of nature and the initial conditions of the universe should allow for the existence of beings who could observe it. That's us. Life as we know it would be impossible if any of several physical quantities had slightly different values. One constant does seem to require an incredible fine-tuning. The existence of life of any kind seems to require a cancellation between different contributions to the vacuum energy, accurate to about 120 decimal places. The universe either would go through a complete cycle of expansion and contraction before life could arise, or would expand so rapidly that no galaxies or stars could form. In other words, the physics aside, the point is that the universe had to be finely tuned to make possible life, what we take for granted. Just seems to have evolved. Impossible. The odds are extremely against it. And that's why it says the following thing, right? This is by Michael Turner, astrophysicist at the University of Chicago. Fermilab, he writes the following thing: the precision of the universe is as if one could throw a dart across the entire universe and hit a bullseye 1 millimeter in diameter on the other side. I mean, what is it saying? Basically saying that'd be foolish, completely foolish, not to believe in God. So even the article, the Time magazine article, 1992, says the following thing: the other half of the paradox, and paradox is different than contradiction. Contradiction means that two realities that should not exist cannot exist. Paradox means that two realities that seemingly shouldn't exist do exist, which implies they can exist. And if they do exist, the reason why we can't understand is not because they shouldn't exist, but because somehow we lack information to put it all together, to make sense of the two realities. So the other half of the paradox, as the article, comes from stepping back and looking at the big picture. The big picture. An overarching pattern defines the big picture. An overarching pattern that encompasses the many feats of 20th century science and transcends them, rises above it, goes beyond just what the physical eyes can see, as if going up in an airplane and looking at the city below. All of a sudden, what was just a house, just a bunch of buildings, becomes a whole community, and your viewpoint, your perspective changes. And with that, your insight and your understanding. A pattern suggesting, to some scientists at least, that there's more to the universe than meets the eye, meets the physical eye. Something authentically divine about how it all fits together. Question becomes, two groups of scientists. One group believes in God, and one group does not believe in God. So the question becomes why? What's the difference? Is it that one group is smarter than the other group? If that was the case, the question is solved. The question is resolved. His answer is resolved. The issue is resolved. Because all you have to do is go with the group that's smart. You're smarter, you believe, we'll go with you. You're smarter and you don't believe, we'll go with you. Turns out that, of course, that both groups are made up of geniuses. Those who believe and those who don't believe, brilliant people, smart people across the board. Throw that one out, doesn't work, right?